Christmas Eve, 1933, was as cold and bitter as I'd ever known. The wind moaned through the trees, rattling the windows of our modest home. Inside, the fire cast flickering shadows across the parlor walls, illuminating the Christmas tree adorned with garlands and candles. Yet despite the cheer of the season, an unease settled over me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Elspeth, my doll, sat on the mantel, staring down at me. A gift from my grandmother years ago. She had always unnerved me, though I could never say why. Her porcelain face was flawless, her lips painted into a delicate smile. But it was her eyes, those glassy, pale blue eyes, that seemed too aware, too alive. Even as a child, I sometimes caught myself whispering, "Stop looking at me," before shoving her into a trunk. This year, however, my mother had insisted she sit in the parlor as part of the holiday decorations. "Your grandmother loved her," she'd said, brushing dust from Elspeth's hair with care. And so, there she sat, watching. That evening, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I lingered in the parlor, the fire slowly dying to embers. I had the uneasy feeling of being watched, though no one else was in the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw Elspeth's head tilt ever so slightly, as though acknowledging me. I froze, but when I turned to look directly at her, she was still, her face as blank and serene as ever. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light or my imagination, and turned to leave. Then came the knock. It was sharp, deliberate, and came from the front door. My parents were upstairs, fast asleep, and no one else lived within miles of our home. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach, but the knock came again. When I finally opened the door, there was no one there. The snow outside was pristine, save for a single footprint, a small one. It led not away from the door, but toward the window where Elspeth sat. I slammed the door shut and backed away, heart pounding. Elspeth hadn't moved, but something about her seemed different, her smile wider, her gaze sharper. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself the events of the evening were nothing but an overactive imagination. The knock, the footprint. It had to be a trick of the storm, I reasoned. Yet every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elspeth's face. At some point, I gave up on sleep and crept downstairs. The house was silent except for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The fire in the parlor had burned out completely, leaving the room in a shroud of darkness. The air was thick, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Elspeth was gone. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted around the room, searching for her familiar shape, but she was nowhere to be seen. A low, childlike giggle echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. The giggle came again, this time from the direction of the cellar. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to wake my parents, but some unseen force seemed to pull me forward. I couldn't explain it, but I had to know. I had to see. The cellar door groaned as I opened it, revealing a yawning darkness. The wooden stairs felt treacherous underfoot as I descended, each creak like a scream in the silence. The air was colder here, damp and heavy with the scent of mildew. In the dim light, I saw her. Elspeth sat upright on an old workbench, her back to me, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Around her were tools and carvings I didn't recognize, as though someone had been working on her. "Elspeth," I whispered, not knowing what I hoped to accomplish. Her head turned slowly, impossibly, to face me, and then she smiled, Not the painted porcelain smile I'd known all my life, but something wider, deeper, filled with malice. The whisper came then, soft and chilling. "Let me out." I stumbled back, my heart thundering in my chest. The voice had been so clear, yet I couldn't see its source. Elspeth sat motionless on the workbench, her glassy eyes fixed on me. But the malice in her smile lingered, as if the doll were savoring my terror. The air grew heavier, pressing down on me as though I were underwater. A faint hum began to resonate, low and mournful, and I realized it wasn't just coming from Elspeth, but from the walls, the floor, the very air around me. I backed toward the stairs, desperate to escape, but my foot caught on something. Looking down, I saw a wooden carving, intricate and worn with age. It depicted a twisted face, its mouth open in a silent scream. My trembling hands picked it up, and the hum grew louder. Beneath the carving, scratched into the wood of the bench, were strange symbols, circles and jagged lines that made my head throb to look at. "Elspeth," I whispered again, not knowing why. This time, she moved, not with the jerky, stiff motion I might have expected, but with an eerie grace, tilting her head slightly to one side as though listening. Her porcelain hand twitched, and her tiny fingers curled into a fist before pointing. At the end of the bench lay a key. It was ornate, brass, and cold to the touch when I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should, as though it carried something more than its weight. The whispers began again, louder now, echoing in my ears. "Use it," they urged, their tones childlike but insistent. "Set us free." I didn't understand, but every instinct screamed that I needed to leave. Now. I turned to run up the stairs, clutching the key, but Elspeth's laughter stopped me cold. It wasn't the sweet, innocent sound of a child, but something warped and cruel. I turned back and she was standing on the bench. Her head cocked at an impossible angle, her smile stretched wider than should have been possible. And then she leapt. I screamed, stumbling backward, but her tiny frame never touched me. Instead, she landed on the floor, her movements impossibly fast, skittering toward the shadows like a spider. The whispers rose into a deafening cacophony as I bolted up the stairs and slammed the cellar door shut behind me. But I knew it wasn't over. Elspeth was still down there, waiting, and the key burned like ice in my palm. I sat in the parlor, trembling, the key clutched tightly in my hand. I wanted to throw it into the fire, to rid myself of it, but something stopped me. The whispers hadn't ceased, though they were softer now, almost pleading. "You have to use it," they murmured. "Break the curse." The symbols from the cellar flashed in my mind, and I realized with growing dread that they seemed familiar. I turned to the fireplace, the central piece of the parlor, and saw the faint outlines of similar carvings in the stonework. They had always been there, unnoticed and unremarkable, until now. Elspeth's giggle drifted up from the cellar, sending a chill down my spine. I knew she wouldn't stay down there for long. My fingers traced the outline of the key, its cold metal biting into my skin, and I approached the fireplace. There, at the very center of the carvings, was a small slot. It matched the size of the key perfectly. My hands shook as I slid the key into place. The whispers grew louder, a swirling chorus of voices urging me on. With a deep breath, I turned it. The room erupted in light, blue, cold, and blinding. A wind howled through the house, though all the windows were shut. I was thrown backward, landing hard on the floor, and for a moment I couldn't move. When I opened my eyes, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, materializing in the light. They were translucent, their faces twisted with sorrow and rage. They surrounded the fireplace, their mouths moving in silent wails. At their center stood the Dollmaker himself, or what remained of him. His form was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his hands reached out toward me, pleading. "Elspeth," he rasped, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "She is the last. Break her hold and we can be free." But before I could respond, a piercing scream filled the room. Elspeth was there, her tiny form ablaze with a terrible energy. She lunged for me, faster than I could react, her porcelain fingers clawing at my face. I grabbed the key and thrust it deeper into the slot, twisting with all my strength. The symbols on the fireplace flared to life, and Elspeth let out a shriek that rattled the walls. Her porcelain skin cracked and splintered, and the light engulfed her. When it faded, the room was silent. Elspeth lay on the floor, shattered and lifeless. But I knew it wasn't truly over. The silence in the room felt like a physical weight, pressing down on me. Elspeth's shattered remains lay scattered across the parlor floor, her glass eyes staring blankly from where they had rolled. The eerie blue light that had flooded the room moments before was gone, leaving the faint orange glow of the dying embers in the hearth. For a long while I couldn't move. My chest heaved with each breath, and my trembling fingers remained locked around the key. The whispers had stopped, and though the oppressive presence had lifted, the air was still thick with unease. I forced myself to my feet, every joint in my body aching, and stared at the fireplace. The carvings on the stone were still faintly visible, but the symbols no longer glowed. Whatever force had animated them seemed to have been snuffed out with Elspeth. Yet something nagged at me, a feeling that I had merely scratched the surface of a far greater mystery. "Elspeth," I whispered, as though saying her name might summon her spirit. But she remained lifeless, her porcelain face fractured into jagged shards. The house was quiet now, too quiet, as if the walls were listening. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in the parlor until dawn, staring at the fireplace and clutching the key like a talisman. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the frosted windows, I felt the suffocating tension of the night begin to ease. When my parents awoke, I tried to tell them what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. I could already see the doubt in their eyes, the gentle dismissal of a child's imagination. My father merely grumbled about a mess in the parlor when he noticed Elspeth's remains. "Careless handling," he muttered, scooping up the broken pieces. "Such a shame, your grandmother loved this doll." I said nothing as he threw her into the ash bin by the fireplace. But when I saw her glass eyes staring back at me from the soot, I had to look away. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal, at least on the surface. I buried myself in chores and studies, desperate to forget what had happened that night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The whispers no longer filled the house, but every so often, I would hear faint giggles in the dead of night. Then there was the key. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it, though it seemed to pulse with a cold, unnatural energy whenever I touched it. I hid it in a drawer, but no matter how deeply I buried it under old papers and trinkets, I always knew exactly where it was. One evening, as I prepared for bed, I found something chilling. On my desk, where I'd left my school books, was a small porcelain shard. It was smooth and white, unmistakable. I picked it up with trembling fingers and immediately recognized it as a piece of Elspeth's face. I turned it over, and my blood ran cold. On the back, scratched into the porcelain, was a single word. Soon. I don't know if I'll ever truly escape the Dollmaker's curse, Perhaps breaking Elspeth only awakened something deeper, something older. As I write this, I can hear faint scratching coming from the drawer where the key lies. And sometimes when I walk past the fireplace, I feel eyes on me, blue and glassy, watching from the shadows.